four more scenarios to go over first before we move on to. Oh, sorry. Before we move on to the Haiti Gambit. But first, this quick little scenario we're going to run is just something really brief that you may want to consider. Sorry. There is this neat little idea that you could be playing against the. Oh, come on. The symmetrical variation of the King's Indian attack that you could be playing. Once you start from here, you could be playing this, and then your opponent could be playing this. And the reason why this is important is because you can actually transpose this into a King's Indian. Oh, that's an inaccuracy, so they wouldn't play that. What would they play here? Probably this. Yeah, that's still a book move. And then your opponent could be playing this and then this. And you've essentially transposed the King's Indian attack, which this originally was. Yeah, King's Indian attack symmetrical defense. And we transposed it into a King's Indian defense, a fianchetto variation of the King's Indian defense. That is one little trick you can attempt to do. And the reason why I'm going over this a little briefly is because when you play this, your game plan is slightly different compared to what you would be doing if you had bishop here instead of here. But now that the bishop is here, sorry, your game plan might be a little different. So your game plan from here now is rook to e8. Oh, no, wait. Rook to e8 is... Your opponent will be playing that, actually. Your opponent will play rook e8, and you'll play rook e1. And his main idea is something like a6, and you respond with d5. Stop the knight from getting anywhere here. Actually, that doesn't work. What is it? You know what? I'm going to look at something else first. What happens if he takes? Is that a book move? No, that's not a book move. But it is one of the scenarios that you're gonna run into, and then you go knight takes e4. The knight takes d4. This is a very common scenario you're going to run into, so we'll go over that. Knight to c5 is the next move. Against this, probably the best idea is to just go h3. That will prepare for things like you have your queen invading this way. You know you're gonna push your pawn here. You gotta push your pawn here and here. It prepares for that, and then he'll go h6, and then you can go something like, say, probably rook b1. The reason why I need to play rook b1 is this pawn right here. You technically could push this, but on its own, it's not gonna hold. On its own, it's not gonna hold. It can be taken by the knight, and as soon as it gets taken by the knight, the only way you can defend it without bringing the rook there is you're going to have to take back with the pawn like this pawn like this, which means that file, yeah, game over. So because of that, you need that rook there so that this pawn can. You will have to come up with a way to defend this pawn some other way. Probably this knight is a good spot because of that, but you have to watch out for this file. The Fianchetto variation means that your opponent definitely could be attacking from here, even though what he played was the King's Indian defense. In the Pierce and modern defenses, which way your opponent could be attacking could range like anywhere, and the variance comes up a lot. In King's Indian defenses and King's Indian defense and King's Indian attack, like most variations, like you will whoever's playing the King's Indian setup will be attacking on the king side unless they've pushed pawn to c pawn along the pawn their pawn along the c file. Sorry, and there are some outliers in that, and this is one of those outliers that you're going to see here. But oh please. This is one of those outliers where your opponent could be playing from the queen side despite having played the King's Indian setup and pushed e4 instead. But these cases are very, very rare. In most cases, in any King's Indian setups, whoever played that King's Indian setup will usually attack on the king side. And that is not so much the case in the Pierce and modern setups. And sometimes when you play the King's Indian attack, you will run into these Pierce / modern like setups, because what determines whether a position is a King's Indian or a Pierce has more to do with what setup that whoever has not been playing that exact setup has kind of formed their structure into. So if they didn't push their pawn on along the c file to form that triple pawn structure, if they didn't do that, very likely they want to attack on the. Very likely that means they want to attack on the king side. Sometimes that's not the case, but usually that is the case. But then in pure setups, it's usually like 50-50 because like it's very complicated. But it's like the difference between a King's Indian the difference between a King's Indian defense and a Pierce defense is that the c pawn wasn't pushed, the c file pawn wasn't pushed. Especially if your opponent is the white pieces. And this is why even when you play a King's Indian attack, your opponent could be playing your opponent could be playing what white would be playing in the Pierce defense, and you may have to adjust your gameplay accordingly, because now that he hasn't pushed his c pawn to like form a defensive wall, that means the whole now the whole variance thing is going to be a bigger problem than it normally would have been. But this is a rare case where it is that King's Indian defense structure for both sides. But again, because your pieces are already moved to the queen side there, Now they're stuck guarding the queen side. Now you have to use your bishops to attack the king side at that point. Because yeah, you technically could bring all your pieces to the queen side, but then they're stuck there. That rook is still eyeing down that file. You can't attack without that rook taken off the board. So probably from here, very likely knight to e6. E6. So very likely his next move is knight to e6. And then knight takes e6. Bishop takes e6. That knight was just sitting there, just taking that pawn. It was pretty much useless. b3 is your next move to form this pawn chain. And you still need that knight to guard this. Oh. You still need that knight to guard this. Queen to c8. h4. Bishop to h3. Yeah, he's just getting right in there. This is what you're trying to. This is what your opponent is trying to do. There was a game earlier today between Magnus Carlsen and Zhu, and when she had to face a similar setup like this, she was playing the black pieces. It was a King's Indian attack. Now look at this scenario. It's King's Indian defense, but at the time Magnus was playing the King's Indian attack, which means he was playing the King's Indian setup himself. But obviously in that exact, oh, by the way, as of recording, it's right now 6th of May. So that's why I said it's earlier today, but you might be seeing this video later. But anyway, when she had to face this exact setup, moving the bishop here and refusing the trade, it was considered a blunder. But in this case, this is actually pretty good. And that is probably the move you want to play. And then he goes c6. He might play that. He might not play that. We never know. Bishop to b2. Just prepare that fianchetto. Protect the knight. That's protecting the pawn. And then he goes queen c7. Knight to e2. I don't. Well, you could be attacking here, but I mean the bishop is actually that's a pretty good idea because the bishop is undefended. You might attack the bishop from here. That's not a bad idea to go for. And then he'll usually go bishop g4. What's bishop g4? He goes here to stop you from attacking that bishop. Your only move is to ignore that and unpin your queen. He was eyeing there. He was eyeing for your queen too. So he was pinning the knight to your queen. So you gotta unpin. Rook a d8 is what's gonna come up next. And against this, you play bishop to g2. Back to the fianchetto. c8. And then he'll retreat the bishop all the way back. The rook is now centralized, so that's an advantage on his part. Rook bd1. Now both rooks are eyeing down here. This is gonna get super scary in the endgame. And then his next move, knight to g4. knight to g4. So he's playing that aggressive maneuver again. But I don't know why he's calling it the best move, because that means he's opened it up for that bishop to be taken and you can just trade. I don't know if that bishop trade is actually good or not. Put myself in this player's shoes. I might have considered just preserving that bishop to like attack the rook, but then it would have been pretty difficult to find something that would attack that rook. Queen c3 check is next. It's us playing that now. There we go. Also, so it was a better move to play queen to c3 check, and then he has to go king to h7 just to avoid that. And we go knight to d4. That's blocking the queen, but there is potential of this if we can like get the pawn out of the way. We could be winning a fork here. And then he goes a6, a3, queen to b6. He's attacking this pawn. a4, a5, and then f3. Attack that knight, and now he has to go knight to e5, his only move. And then king to h2. I don't know why it's knight takes d4. Why is it like that? Yeah, there you go. So we're just going over like some of the, so we were just going over like some of the potential moves you could be facing along the middle game. This is just one rough idea that you could be playing, but again, just remember that when you're playing this variation of the King's Indian defense, I mean, you may want to just play it like a. I mean, maybe you don't want to fianchetto if he does this. Maybe you don't want to fianchetto if he does this. You could try, like, say maybe you don't want to fianchetto. Maybe you want to try this to see what he does. Oh wait, no, that's probably a horrible idea because knight takes and he just wins a pawn for free. What's a good route that you could be taking? I mean, in the symmetrical variation of the King's Indian attack, you already have to play this, so that might be something you want to play. Against this, if he goes like this, you know what to do. Push this, and now it's a King's Indian defense. And then he castles and then nope. And then he castles and then you just push here. And then he pushes this and you think you don't think it. You put your bishop here and then he pushes and then castles and then you're back to playing the bayonet attack that you're used to playing, which this. Remember this stuff? But yeah, that is another way you could be facing the King's Indian attack in symmetrical variation. You there is the idea of transposing it into a real King's Indian defense, because remember, if you play this, remember, like, you could be playing this, but then when you go into, oh, sorry, when you go into this, you and then you play this symmetrical variation of the King's Indian attack. Your only move is c4, and when you play that c4, and then he goes e5, the only move that works is knight to c3, and then it ends up being what Chess.com calls it, King's Indian defense, and then you have to look at Levy's course on the English Opening, how to face the King's Indian defense against playing the English Opening. But again, this I wouldn't call this King's Indian defense. This isn't King's Indian defense proper, because King's Indian defense proper will requires your pawn to be here. Okay, this is not King's Indian defense. This is not King's Indian defense. I don't know what this. I don't know what this is. This is technically an Anglo-Indian defense, because there's that, and then there's the Indian defense. But like an Indian defense in general is d4 knight to f6, unless there is d4 knight to f6 that actually had been played. Unless that actually happened, this is not King's Indian defense. This is not a King's Indian defense, because d4 was never played. D4 has to be played in order for this to be called a King's Indian defense. I don't know what this is. This is not a King's Indian defense. I don't know why Chess.com calls this King's Indian defense. This is not King's Indian defense. Like, if you look this up on Lichess, like, I can assure you, like, if you plug this in on Lichess, right? If you plug these exact moves on Lichess, I'll show you what I'm talking about here. It's King's Indian attack symmetrical defense, right? So again, you'll play your symmetrical defense here. The most popular move is somehow e4, which is weird. But again, your only move is c4, and then and then very likely your opponent will play here. And then the only move you have is knight to c3. Look at this. They will not call this King's Indian defense. They will not call this King's Indian defense. This is still, Lichess still calls it symmetrical defense of King's Indian attack. These guys still call this King's Indian attack. And even then, like you try to pull this variation, if you try to pull this variation on Lichess, and go this way, trying to do the same thing from before, right? Look at this. These guys call it Anglo-Indian defense. d4 was never played. If d4 was played, it would be called King's Indian defense. But this is not King's Indian defense. So I don't know what this is. I don't know why he's calling it King's Indian defense. Yeah, there was no d4 to be played here. And this is d3. But anyway, like, but anyway, there you go. You do have multiple ways you can face the King's Indian like the King's Indian like symmetrical variation of the King's Indian attack, and now in the next scenario we're going to look into learning how to which one was it? I'm pretty sure the next. Sorry, this is encoding overloaded. I'm pretty sure the next scenario that we're gonna look into is probably which one was it? I think the next one was I'm trying to think. There was no, we went over we went over some of the Pierce stuff. I'm pretty sure the next one is one of the scenarios we're going over is how to deal with the bishop endgame, but there were like two other scenarios that we need to go over. I'm struggling to remember what they were. Huh. We'll come back to it when we. Yeah, you'll see it very soon. Okay, have fun.